Hold me closer, tiny dancer.
Hey! Who you calling a tiny dancer?
Ooh, sorry about that. I'll stop singing now and go hang my head in shame. What is up, everybody? Random Man here, bringing you my review for Rocketman. Now, the plot of this biographical musical film is based on the life of Elton John, played by Taran Edgerton, as it follows his early days as a prodigy at the Royal Academy of Music to his musical partnership with Bernie Taupin, played by Jamie Bell. Going into this movie, I was highly anticipating it. This was one of my most anticipated movies of 2019 for it being a biopic on Elton John, whose music I love. I am a big fan of this guy. The lead that was cast to be Elton, Taran Edgerton, who I think is a really talented actor, and the unique approach that this biopic was taking in order to tell the story of its subject. This movie has been marketed as being based on a true fantasy, which implied to me that this wouldn't necessarily be the typical biopic that we have seen done before. In the past few decades, we have gotten quite a number of music biopics. Some of my favorites include 1997's Selena, 2005's Walk the Line, which is about the life of Johnny Cash. This decade, we've even gotten films such as Straight Outta Compton from 2015. That was one of my favorite films of that year. And then, of course, last year, we got Bohemian Rhapsody, which was based on the life of Queen's Freddie Mercury. I personally thought it was okay at best, but it ended up being a monster hit. It grossed over $900 million at the worldwide box office, and despite a divisive reaction from critics and audiences, it walked away with 4 Academy Award wins, including one for Best Actor. Rami Malek won for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury, which I personally thought was well-deserved, and I think it's quite a bit impressive to see this movie marred by so much behind-the-scenes controversy overcome all odds. Now, with the release of Rocketman coming so close to the initial November 2018 release of Bohemian Rhapsody, both of these films are gonna get a lot of comparisons drawn to them. They are both similar in that they're music biopics based on 2 iconic British musicians, both part of the LGBTQ plus community and having their own personal problems throughout their careers. The most interesting connection between these films, in my opinion, is the fact that Rocketman's director, Dexter Fletcher, was the original choice to direct Bohemian Rhapsody before Bryan Singer was chosen to helm that project. Then, when Singer got fired before that production was over, Fletcher was brought in to finish that film, walking away with an executive producer credit because, according to DGA guidelines, Singer, having directed most of the movie before getting fired, would still end up getting the full director credit. And like I said, Bohemian Rhapsody became such a gigantic hit that it does make me wonder how Rocketman will do within its own financial attributes. But setting all of that aside, how does Rocketman hold up on its own merits? Well, starting out with the cast and their performances, we have Taran Edgerton as our lead, portraying Elton John. I always thought that this guy was an inspired choice to portray this iconic musician, as for one thing, he resembles this guy in his younger years. He can sing, as he proved in the animated film Sing, where he played the gorilla in that movie. He has quite a nice voice, and I also think that he is a talented actor. Most of us first saw Edgerton as Eggsy in Kingsman: The Secret Service, and though I am not the biggest fan of that movie, he was very good there, showing off his action movie chops. And in Rocketman, not only does he show more of his own singing chops, but also more of his acting, as he gives a fantastic portrayal of Elton John. Not only does Edgerton capture the spirit and showmanship that Elton John had on stage performing his famous songs, but also, and more impressively in my mind, he was able to capture a lot of the raw emotional distraughtness that this real-life musician had in going through all of his personal problems with drugs, alcohol, what have you, all of that. I thought that Edgerton was able to handle with such class and also with enough realism that it made me feel like I was watching the real-life John go through all of this as this movie so vividly portrayed. The supporting cast of this film include the likes of Jamie Bell as Bernie Taupin, the longtime musical partner of Elton John. I thought he was also very good in this film. He also does quite a bit of his own singing in this movie. I believe the rest of the cast does as well whenever the musical moments do show up in this film. The chemistry between Bell and Edgerton I also thought was quite kinetic. It made me believe the real-life friendship that these two figures had. There's Richard Madden as John Reed, the manager to Elton John and also his lover. This is the same character that was portrayed by Aidan Gillen in Bohemian Rhapsody. Coincidentally, both of these actors are from Game of Thrones. And I thought Madden did quite an outstanding job here. There's also Bryce Dallas Howard as Sheila, the mother to Elton John, who is quite cold and dismissive of his son, but I thought that she was effectively able to portray the importance that she had in John's life. I've also got to give a shout out to the two young actors that portray the younger versions of Elton John, and they are Kit Connor and Matthew Leslie. I apologize if I butchered that name, but these two young actors portraying John early on in the movie before Edgerton takes over the film, they really did capture some of the shyness that John had as a child, but also the talent that was just starting to grow as he entered his adult years. So all in all, I think that the cast in this film all do some pretty standout jobs, but the one who stands out the most, of course, is Taran Edgerton. The writing of this film from Lee Hall initially sets up this film to have a show-stopping moment from Elton John, all decked out in one of his famous elaborate outfits, but then it transitions into him being in an Alcoholics Anonymous / intervention type of environment where he is recalling his entire life story in that setting. This is also where the movie sets up its framing structure in centering around the famous hit songs of Elton John while telling his story from his youth all the way into adulthood. This approach, along with the creative direction from Dexter Fletcher, made this movie very much feel like a jukebox musical kind of film where we do transition from song to song as the narrative is playing out, but it keeps the narrative moving to such an energetic degree while also infusing a lot of emotion within it. This execution had such a high level of inventiveness with it that I haven't seen a movie like this one pull it off with such a spectacular degree in a while. This film definitely did not go with the straight biopic approach in using the music as some points of the plot where, hey, we see some of the famous songs from this musician being written out and recorded in the studio. No. Throughout the film, music from Elton John is used in order to tell some of the more emotional aspects of his youth and adulthood, and also some other supporting players of the film do get involved directly with these musical sequences. As like I mentioned before, I believe a lot of the supporting cast do provide their own vocals along with Taran Edgerton. And by the way, speaking of Edgerton's vocals, the real life John apparently did not want him to do a straight up imitation of his singing style, and it does show as Edgerton's voice doesn't completely line up with how Elton John sang his own songs, but like I've mentioned before, Edgerton is a pretty strong singer in his own right, and just the performance charisma that Edgerton has as John really showed it off in spades. It's such a dynamic movie, to say the least, with all of the musical numbers. I mean, who doesn't love Elton John's music? I think that he is somebody that has created some of the most catchy songs ever made, and the way a lot of them are used in this film, wow. My favorite moment of the film easily comes when Crocodile Rock is performed, and I'm not just saying that as that is my personal favorite Elton John song, but the way the scene is framed, the way Edgerton is performing, the way the music swelled, and when a choir comes in to fill in the la 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 part, oh man, that was such a pitch perfect moment. I got chills, goosebumps watching that scene. It's not just the musical numbers that are pulled off to an exceptional extent. It's also the darker and more dour moments in Elton John's life that do make for some of the more effective emotional moments of the movie too. Whenever the movie transitions from the lighter side to the darker side, it is seamless, not just with the camera movements and edits, but also the situation that John himself is put in. And I thought that made for a tone that balanced itself out to keep it going. In fact, the real-life Elton John, who is an executive producer on this film, did not want the filmmakers to hold back from going deeper into his not-so-glamorous behind-the-scenes life throughout his career that is shown in this movie. He even said himself that he did not lead a PG-13 life. He led a rated R life, and that's what this movie is, rated R. Not for Rocketman, though, I hope. No. Yeah, this movie goes into his drug addiction, his alcoholism. He even considered himself a sex addict, which, speaking of that, this is the first mainstream Hollywood production to show a male gay sex scene. To talk about that briefly, it wasn't the most graphic thing I've ever seen in a movie, but it's certainly going to be a point of contention for some when watching this movie. Before I even started shooting footage for this review, I saw an Instagram post from Paramount Pictures, the studio behind this film, saying that they have no intent in wanting this movie to be censored for Russian audiences, as Russia actually edited out some of the more explicit moments of this movie, and this disheartened the studio, obviously, but I'm sure it disheartened the real-life Elton John as well, as he wanted his story to be shown and portrayed as it was when he was living his life decades ago. These details I am not just emphasizing to praise this film over, say, Bohemian Rhapsody, because that movie had some contention for it being notably inaccurate, for swapping events around just for the sake of cheap drama, in my opinion. But I'm emphasizing these points in Rocketman as they just made for a more engaging narrative by going deeper into the more explicit aspects of Elton John's life. And as the movie carried along, it really got me to care for him as a character in this film and just really take it all in and be entertained by the ride that it was literally taking me on. This is not even mentioning all the other technical merits with this film, which I'll get to now, as this is such a marvelous looking movie. I was in awe watching this film throughout so many moments with its cinematography, in the way the camera moved around in some, not just musical numbers, but also in the way some scenes in between carried out. The movie literally just kept on moving, not just with the camera, but then also the way this movie looked with all its glitz and glam, the costume design, production design being accurate to the various years that this movie covers. The music I've already emphasized. It's great. The music is a bunch of Elton John tunes. Hell, I even stayed through the end credits to hear this movie's rendition of Don't Go Breaking My Heart, because I was that impressed by the actors' vocals in this film. But I also have to give a shout out to the original score of this film from Matthew Margeson, as the various pieces that he composed for this film did help keep the movie moving along, also emphasizing some of the more emotional moments too, and complementing all of the famous known hits from Elton John. It all came along at about a 2-hour running time, which I thought was efficient. I never felt it skip a beat or slow down at any notable moment. I thought it was well timed. Really, I had a blast watching this film, and I can only think of nitpicks here and there that I would say I have with this film. The ending of this movie, it didn't go for a show-stopping moment like I expected this movie to initially begin with, which I liked. It subverted my expectations and really got me into the narrative more. The way this movie ended, it ended more sensibly than I expected. This is something I could see audiences not feeling have the biggest emotional impact in having the ending being satisfying, but I say this movie is more than satisfying because it is a happy ending of sorts, what with it also showing how John was after he did get cleaned up. Of course, I'm not spoiling that because he is alive and well right now. He executive produced this movie again. The only other minor quibbles I would say I have with this film involve the supporting characters popping in and out of the movie, mainly having to do with the musical sequences. But again, it's something I don't think that is major at all, and it just shows that the emphasis was put on John himself as the subject, and really him being surrounded by this unique musical approach to tell his life's story. And what a life's story this is as portrayed in a musical film setting. This movie is something that not only shoots off into the stars as the title Rocketman would imply, but it soars, just like Edgerton's performance, which I hope is remembered by this year's end for some awards consideration. The direction by Dexter Fletcher, the all-around design and look of this movie, and again, the approach that this movie uses as a biopic, I cannot see being topped anytime soon. A new high bar has been set for music biopics with Rocketman. I can see this being one of the more celebrated and embraced films within the genre. I loved it. It is one of my favorites of the year so far. I highly recommend it. My final verdict for Rocketman is 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Be sure to like this video, comment on what you thought of Rocketman. Social media links in the description. Subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll catch you on the next movie review.